I never thought I would be in this position. Sitting here, alone in my room, thinking about how everything has changed. A secret that has been gnawing at me, making me question everything I've ever known about myself. How can I even explain this? I don't think I've ever really let myself be honest with anyone before, not even with myself. But something's happened. Something I can't ignore anymore. Let me start by telling you a little about myself. My name is Clara, and I'm married to Mark. We've been married for 10 years now. Mark is a good man, don't get me wrong. He works hard, loves me the best way he knows how, and provides for this family. But, he's not what I need. At least, not anymore. When we first got together, I was in a very different place. I was younger, more hopeful about life and love, about what marriage should be. But after years of being with Mark, things have started to feel empty. I didn't want to admit it at first, but it's true. Mark is always busy with work, constantly traveling, always distracted. When he is home, he's distant, wrapped up in his own thoughts, his own world. There's no intimacy anymore. No tenderness. No affection. Not in the way a woman needs it. And so, I found myself alone, a lot. My desires, my needs, remain unspoken, unacknowledged. I've tried to ignore it, push it down, but it keeps resurfacing. The loneliness, the frustration, the feeling of being invisible. I'm a woman, after all. I have needs, and they've been left unmet for so long. But then, there's Luke. I never meant for things to happen the way they did. I never planned for any of this. Luke is Mark's son from his first marriage. He's grown now, 19 years old, a young man. And I've always tried to be a good stepmother to him. I've treated him like my own, cared for him, supported him. But recently, things have changed. I noticed it in the way he looked at me, in the way he started to act around me. It was subtle at first, just a glance here, a lingering touch there, but it grew. It grew in a way I couldn't ignore. It's not just him, though. It's me too. I find myself thinking about him in ways I shouldn't. When he's close to me, I feel his presence in a way I haven't felt from anyone in a long time. And I've been too afraid to confront it. The feelings, the pull between us, what does it mean? Is it just desire? Or something more? It was a quiet evening when it all began. Mark had gone away on one of his business trips, as usual. And it was just Luke and I left in the house, a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I was in my room, lying on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the loneliness creeping in once again. I was tired, physically, emotionally, and thought I'd just go to sleep. I like to sleep in nightie as it makes me feel relaxed, so it was a nightie with deep neck and of net see-through as my husband loves these type of things, so now it's been a part of my life wearing these whenever I sleep. As I try to sleep. But then there was a knock on the door. Soft, tentative. It was Luke. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "Can I come in?" I wasn't sure what I expected, but there he was, standing in my doorway, looking almost hesitant. His eyes were different, though. There was something in them that made my heart race, something I couldn't put my finger on. A question. A desire. And I couldn't ignore it. "Of course, Luke. What's going on?" I asked, sitting up in bed, trying to act normal. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him softly. His gaze lingered on me, his eyes sweeping over my face, almost as though he was searching for something. When he saw me in nightie, he looks towards my figure and can't take his eyes off. "I don't know," he said quietly. "It's just. I've been thinking a lot lately. About us." My breath caught in my throat. I knew exactly what he meant. And I knew exactly what I was afraid of. What do you mean, Luke? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my pulse quicken. He walked toward the bed, slowly, carefully, as if testing the waters. I don't know how to explain it, but there's this feeling between us. I can't ignore it anymore. He stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. But in that silence, everything changed. I could feel it in the air, heavy and electric. I could feel the tension, the desire that we'd both been ignoring for so long. I knew what was coming before he even moved. His hand reached for mine, and without thinking, I let him take it. He sat down on the bed beside me, his body close enough that I could feel his warmth. My heart pounded as I looked into his eyes, those deep, brown eyes that had been lingering in my thoughts for weeks now. "I need you," he whispered, and those words, tore through me like a jolt of electricity. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to push him away, tell him this was wrong. But another part of me, the part that had been starving for attention, for affection, for touch, wanted him closer. And then, without another word, Luke leaned in. His lips brushed against mine, just barely, but it was enough to send a wave of heat through me. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I kissed him back, slowly at first, but it deepened quickly. There was no going back after that. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and my arms wrapped around his neck. I felt his body press against mine, and the way he kissed me, so gentle at first, but then with more urgency, made everything else fade away. I needed this. I wanted this. And I couldn't stop it.
I am Lydia, 46 years old, married to Ethan, a 51-year-old businessman, and I live a life that once felt fulfilling but recently seemed to lack the spark it once had. Ethan has always been a driven man, ambitious and successful. His work consumed much of his time, and I, as his wife, had slowly been pushed to the background. It wasn't that he didn't love me, he did, but there was always something missing, an intimacy that we both seemed to neglect over the years. Before starting story, make sure you subscribe my channel for more real infidelity stories and it give me support. We've been married for nearly 2 decades, and in that time, Ethan's career took precedence. Our initial bond, filled with passion and closeness, slowly faded into routine. We had both grown comfortable in our roles, he as the provider, and I as the supportive wife. But somewhere along the way, our connection began to fray, and neither of us knew how to bring it back. Then, Ethan started spending more time with his 3 best friends, David, James, and Paul. All 3 were successful, well-respected men in their fields, but it was their personalities that made them stand out. David, Ethan's business partner, was the quiet and thoughtful one. James, his childhood friend, was bold and adventurous. Paul, a more recent addition to the group, was charismatic and mysterious, with a magnetic charm that seemed to pull people toward him. They were frequent visitors in our home, and while I got along well with them, I noticed something odd. There was an increasing intensity in the air when they were around, something I couldn't quite place. One evening, as I sat on the couch in our living room, Ethan turned to me with an unusual look in his eyes. It was a mixture of excitement and nervousness, a vulnerability I hadn't seen in him in years. "Lydia, I've been thinking about something," he began, his voice softer than usual. "I want you to feel alive again, to reconnect with yourself. There's something you've been missing. I know I haven't been the most attentive husband lately, and maybe, just maybe, we need to explore something new." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, but there was a part of me that already knew the answer. "I think you need to spend some time with my friends, with David, James, and Paul. They've always admired you, and I think there's something there that might help us, rediscover what we've lost. His words hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't tell if I was shocked or intrigued. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. Ethan wanted me to be with his best friends. The idea felt foreign and thrilling, like a forbidden adventure I hadn't dared to consider. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a part of me that felt strangely liberated by the thought. I didn't know what to say, so I remained silent, my heart beating faster. He must have taken my silence as agreement because he gave me a small, understanding smile. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he reassured me. "But I want you to experience things, to feel alive. Maybe we've both been holding each other back." That night, I lay in bed, the thoughts swirling in my mind. What would this mean for me, for us? I didn't know, but I couldn't deny the stir of excitement in my chest. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty, and I found myself thinking about it constantly. Ethan's proposal had opened a door I hadn't expected, one that might lead to something I could never return from. A week later, Ethan invited David, James, and Paul over for dinner. I had spent the entire day preparing, trying to keep my nerves in check. When they arrived, I greeted them with a smile, though my thoughts were far from present. Dinner was a pleasant affair, but there was a new energy in the air, a strange electricity between us all. Ethan was his usual charming self, but I couldn't help but notice the way David's gaze lingered on me or how James seemed to find any excuse to stand near me. Even Paul, with his quiet intensity, watched me with a glimmer in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. After dinner, as Ethan excused himself for a business call, the atmosphere shifted. The three of them moved closer, their presence more pronounced. David sat beside me on the couch, his hand brushing mine as we spoke about trivial matters, but the touch lingered longer than it should have. I felt my pulse quicken, and I looked at him, unsure of how to respond. James, who had been standing across the room, stepped forward with a grin. "You look stunning tonight, Lydia. It's been a while since I've seen you like this. You've got that glow about you," he said, his voice low and teasing. I smiled, flattered but unsure of how to proceed. Then, unexpectedly, his hand landed on my shoulder, his fingers grazing my skin in a way that made me shiver. Paul, quiet until now, leaned against the doorway, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Maybe it's time for you to feel what you've been missing," he said, his tone smooth and confident. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, curiosity, desire. The touch of their hands, the lingering glances, it all sent a thrill through me. But before I could respond, Ethan returned, as if sensing the shift in the room. He smiled knowingly, his eyes glinting with a mixture of pride and satisfaction. "David, James, Paul, you all know Lydia well. I think it's time for her to reconnect with herself," Ethan said. His voice held a certain finality, and for the first time, I wondered if I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. The next day, David called me and asked if I wanted to join him for a quiet evening out. He took me to a local jazz bar, the atmosphere dim and intimate. Over the music and candlelight, David and I shared stories, our conversation flowing easily. He spoke of his childhood, his ambitions, and his thoughts on relationships. I found myself drawn to him, to the warmth in his eyes and the genuine kindness in his voice. As the evening wore on, I found myself leaning closer to him, the distance between us shrinking with every word. David gently reached over, his hand brushing mine, and for a moment, I was lost in the sensation of his touch. The warmth of his skin against mine made my heart race, and before I knew it, our lips met in a soft, lingering kiss. It wasn't rushed or forceful, it was gentle and full of longing, a kiss that told me everything I had been hiding. For the first time in years, I felt desired, wanted. David pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "I've wanted this for so long," he whispered, and I found myself nodding, unable to speak. His kiss was a promise, an unspoken understanding that whatever this was, it was more than just physical. It was a rekindling of something deep within me. A few days later, James invited me to an art gallery opening. He was the bold one, always ready with a joke or a flirtatious remark. The evening was filled with energy, with laughter and easy conversation, but as we walked through the gallery, something shifted between us. The closer we got, the more I could feel the tension between us. We paused in front of a painting, and before I could comment, James stepped in close. His lips brushed my ear as he whispered, "You know, Lydia, you've got this aura about you. I can't help but be drawn to you." Before I could respond, he turned my face toward his and kissed me deeply, passionately. This kiss was different, urgent, intense, as though we both couldn't wait any longer. His hands roamed to my back, pulling me closer as our bodies melted into each other. When we finally pulled away, both breathless, James grinned. "I don't know what's been holding me back, but I can't fight it anymore. I need you." Paul's invitation came later that week. He took me to a rooftop bar with a stunning view of the city, the lights twinkling below us like stars. We talked about everything and nothing, but there was something about the way he looked at me that made me feel both seen and wanted. As the night grew late, we stood close to the edge, the breeze playing with my hair. Without warning, Paul kissed me, slow and deliberate, his lips firm and confident against mine. The kiss was different from the others. It was possessive, as if he were claiming me. His hands slid down my back, pressing me against him, and I felt the unmistakable bulge in his pants. I was overwhelmed, unsure of what I wanted, but unable to pull away. This was uncharted territory, but the heat between us was undeniable. Days turned into weeks, and my feelings for each of them grew more complex. The intimacy, the affection, they filled something inside me that had long been empty. But it wasn't just physical, it was emotional as well. Each of them brought out a different side of me, and I was beginning to see myself in a way I hadn't in years. David, with his gentle nature, made me feel cherished. James, with his boldness, awakened a part of me that had been dormant, craving excitement and adventure. And Paul, with his magnetic charisma, made me feel alive in ways I hadn't even realized I was missing. Yet, as I navigated this complex web of emotions, I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt creeping in. Ethan had set all of this in motion, but could I truly embrace what was happening? I had always considered myself a loyal wife, but now, I found myself questioning everything I had believed about love, intimacy, and self-identity. One night, as I stood in front of the mirror, I couldn't help but feel a surge of power. I looked different somehow. There was a confidence in my eyes, a fire that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just about the physical connections. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own desires. I was no longer just Ethan's wife, and I wasn't simply Lydia, the woman who had faded into the background. I was someone with wants, needs, and desires that were mine alone. And I was learning to embrace that. Then came a moment I hadn't anticipated, a breakthrough. It was a quiet afternoon when Ethan returned home early, and I could feel the tension in the air. He had noticed the subtle shifts in my demeanor, the way I was no longer content with simply going through the motions. He had seen the changes in me, and though I couldn't tell if it worried him or intrigued him, it had become clear that something had shifted between us. "Lydia," he said one evening, as we sat together on the couch, "I know this has been different. You've changed, and honestly, I didn't expect this. But I see it now, you're happier, more alive. I want to know what's going on, but more than that, I want to understand you better. I want to be part of this journey with you, if you'll let me." I looked at him, the words he spoke catching me off guard. In that moment, I realized something important. Ethan had never been the problem. It wasn't that he didn't love me, it was that I had lost touch with myself. In seeking validation from others, I had forgotten to love myself first. "I've learned a lot about myself, Ethan," I said softly, my fingers brushing against his. "I've learned that I need to explore, to feel alive. But it doesn't mean I don't want you. It's not about replacing you, it's about rediscovering who I am." His gaze softened, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the man I had fallen in love with. The man who was willing to support me through this transformation, even if it meant stepping outside of his comfort zone. As the weeks went on, Ethan and I found a new balance. He and I began reconnecting in ways we hadn't in years. More open, more honest, and more vulnerable with each other. We went on dates, talked about our dreams, and explored new facets of our relationship that had been buried under years of routine. But my journey wasn't just about him. It was about me. I had learned to embrace my body, to celebrate my curves and imperfections, and to own my desires. I had learned that confidence doesn't come from external validation. It comes from within. And that confidence radiated not only in my physical appearance but also in my interactions with the world. There were still moments with David, James, and Paul. Moments of passion and connection that reminded me of my own power, my own capacity for love and desire. But with Ethan, I had rediscovered a partnership, one that was more profound than anything I had ever imagined. We had come full circle, together and separately, learning that love isn't about perfection. It's about growth, trust, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. As I looked at myself in the mirror one last time, I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. No longer just Lydia, the wife, or the woman defined by her relationship. I was Lydia, a woman who had found her voice, her confidence, and her place in a world that was far bigger than I had ever dreamed. And this was just the beginning.